Welcome back to Desk Careers. I am so excited to bring another incredible guest. Today we are speaking with Hajj Nicolas, who is a speech and language therapist at Neuropedia Children's Neuroscience Center here in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. Welcome to Desk Careers, Liz. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited as well. Thank you.
Liz, I have so many questions, but I like to bring my guests on a little journey, and I tend to take them back to the younger years. And in asking this question, where did it all begin for you? It helps our young students begin to understand where they are and help them to connect where they are with a place that you also would have been in, because very often they look up at their career role models and they assume that they went from where they are to being a career role model. And in fact, we know that's not how the journey really is. So let's take you back to your mid-teen age years, say about 14 or 15. Do you remember being a student and the subjects that you were taking? I know biology was one of your favorite subjects, but where in that journey did you think, I really like the sciences and I think I might go down into the medical field?
Well, I always wanted to be in the medical field. I just did not want to work in a hospital. For some reason, I'm a bit traumatized from being in a hospital, the smells, everything. So I didn't want to be in a hospital field, but I did want to be in a medical field. So it was only maybe like a month or two before actually going in college that I decided that, okay, maybe the therapeutical field might suit me since it's paramedical, but it's not really in a hospital and can be exercised in a clinic or in schools or in anything else. I was actually in our summer house. There was like a festival, summer festival, and these were like people selling stuff. So I come across someone and they were like selling homemade products made by kids with determination. And I'm like, that's interesting. And I'm just reading about it and I see speech therapy and I'm like, what is speech therapy? That was literally 2 months before starting. So I'm like, okay, I went home, I Googled that, I researched that. I realized that I have a friend in the field. So I talked to her about it. And then 2 months later, I just signed up for it. I had to do like an exam to enter. And I passed. I had literally no idea what it was about. I just knew it was something in the therapy field. And it was something that will not force me to be in a hospital, but will also be dealing with patients and treatments and all. And I just fell in love ever since I started it. I'm like, this is exactly what I wanted to do and I'm still doing.
What exactly is speech and language therapy? I know young people may, like you said, you didn't really know what it was, and many young people may not have come across this profession. So take us through the typical job description of a speech and language therapist, and then maybe tell us about some of the things that you learn that they don't teach you at school.
Okay, so it is called speech and language, but I think it's more communication. Okay, so anything that has to do with communication difficulties or communication disorders, it's us. So when it comes to verbal communication or nonverbal communication or even written communication, so we deal with kids who have dyslexia, for example, or have trouble reading and writing. Okay, so anything that has to do with communication from a early age, when a child has speech delays or have like pre-existing syndromes or cases that need to be dealt with, up until they might be 70, 80 years old with a stroke that affected their speech and communication, and they need to go to speech therapy. Okay, so it can be anything in between. We have a lot of here in the center because we work with mainly neurological cases. So we have a lot of kids on the spectrum. We have a lot of kids with CP, which is cerebral palsy, a lot of syndromes that we see. And I personally work a lot with kids who have speech disfluency disorders as well. So that's mainly it.
Amazing. So there you were, off to college.
Yeah.
Signed up, not very long before. You're sitting in your first class, listening to a professor. What was going through your mind at that time?
Okay, so I have to say that the first year was a bit not very related to speech therapy. It was all the normal development. I had to do trainings in nurseries and schools, and I'm like, what am I doing here? So that was the first semester. I was like, I'm not really getting what I'm doing here or what is speech therapy. It wasn't until the next semester that we started going to clinics, doing observations, doing trainings, that I started realizing what speech therapy really is. I have to say, the first patient I saw, I still remember her. She was a 9-year-old kid. I saw her in the clinic. And then I was with the mom after, like the therapist was talking to the mom. She was explaining what we were doing in the session, like everything. And the mom was like, I only want to hear her saying mama, which is like mom in Arabic, like, and that was like the thing that she wanted from her 9-year-old. And that got to me really, really, really bad, like it's like, okay, we have a lot of work to do. Okay, so I cried a lot the second semester, that for sure. I saw a lot of new cases. I've never seen a kid on the spectrum before. I've never seen syndromes before. I've never seen a kid with Down syndrome before. I wasn't exposed to any of that. So that was a very tough semester. But after that, I knew that, someone has to do the job. Someone has to be tough enough to just take it all in, and know what to deal and how to deal with it. So yeah, it all changed starting the second year, where you just like, okay, now the work will start.
Amazing. And you're so right that exposure to the patients that you're working with currently.
Yeah.
Do you find that that is a challenge that you see often with young people, that shock because they're not exposed to children on the spectrum, and then when they come into the field, that might be an area that you think, if they had more exposure, they would be more prepared and it would be less of a challenge for them in that first year?
Yeah, I have to say, like, I started college in 2010, which wasn't as it is today. I believe people now are more exposed to what autism is, what Down syndrome is, what epilepsy is. Like, we see a lot of awareness campaigns going on, especially the last few years. So I do think the young generation is kind of more exposed to it. I see a lot of series on Netflix, a lot of movies, you see. So there's a lot of awareness going on one way or another that makes things a bit, more familiar. Sometimes they're not very accurate, though. They still need to come in and see the real deal, but they are more exposed to it, I have to say, than what I was, at least like 11 years ago. But yes, definitely there's a lot of shocking moments as well. There's a lot of new things that they're learning. That's for sure.
I really appreciated that you mentioned your first semester. And I think from my perspective, it helps me to understand how a young person can be gaining experiences. And I know very often our students think, I need to go to a clinic or a center or a hospital. I need to shadow a therapist or a doctor or a nurse to really understand the profession, because that's what will be important for me to apply for this program. But in hearing that first semester, it sounded to me more like maybe young people should be exposed to where their clients or their patients will be, to help them understand the development and not necessarily have to shadow. Would you say that a young person struggling to gain experiences of work, that could be a part of that experience for them, that might be empowering when they're writing a letter of application or applying to university?
Definitely. Like, how can I understand when there's anything wrong with a child's development if I don't understand what the normal development is? I need to observe a child when they're like from nursery up until like early ages in school to understand how the child develops. Now I'm lucky enough to have a niece who's 3 years old, who I've seen growing for the past 3 years, and I understand things even more differently than being in a classroom or a nursery and observing children. So the more you're exposed to normal development, the more you can have that instinct a little bit, that clinical instinct that something's wrong, something needs to be, treated in a different way. So definitely it's always best to start from what's normal development or what's the normal case in any field, not just in therapy, so that you can really understand what's going on when there's therapy needed.
Another really critical area for a young person is thinking about the academic pathway. Now, I know that you did both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in speech therapy. Is this the only pathway towards your career? Can a young person do something different and still become a speech therapist?
I have to talk about my personal experience in Lebanon, which might be different in different countries, honestly. But in my country, yes, you need to have a bachelor's degree in speech therapy to do a master's in speech therapy. I think, like, it might have changed in the past might have changed the past few years. But when I did that, yes, you had to go through speech therapy. I mean, when I did my master's, what it was maybe the first or the second year where master's in speech therapy was implemented in my university. That was still new back in 2015. I did that. So maybe now you can go through like neuropsychology a little bit. If you're doing occupational therapy, maybe, or like related fields, you can still do a master's in speech therapy. But I'm not sure, to be honest, because it's different from one country to another.
Of course, you're absolutely correct. Now, let's talk about the non academics of being a speech
Yeah.
and language therapist. Let's talk about those
Yeah.
things that you can't learn in a classroom. They come naturally, or they're parts of your job that nobody really told you you would need, but you learn very quickly. What would some of those transferable skills be?
I like the top of something on the top of my mind is dealing with parents. That's something that you're never really taught or like never really exposed to enough in college. I remember our fourth year, which was the last year, we kind of did some clinical work where you had to deal with parents, but no two parents are the same. Like you can never expect what's gonna come, especially me, like having like I was doing speech therapy for the first 4 or 5 years in Lebanon, then I moved to UAE where you're exposed to different cultures, different backgrounds, different communities, and it's not the same. Like you cannot predict what a parent might say or might feel, or what kind of background he's coming from, how he might take a new diagnosis, for example, or like if you're giving them things to do at home, how available they are, how engaged they are, how invested they are. Okay, so dealing with parents, I think, is one of the main things that you're not really prepared for enough in college, but then you slowly like learn and acquire that skill on how to talk to parents, how to be understanding as well, because sometimes it's not easy, like the child, most of the times, I mean, depending on the disorder, but most of the times he's not aware of what he has or what he's going through. It's the parents and the siblings, which this is a population I love to work with, the siblings, the sister, the brother, the family, grandparents, because here in Dubai a bit less because it's mainly the parents, but back home, grandparents are very involved in the therapy with the child. So these things you're not really prepared for as much as you should be. But I mean, can you really be prepared for something like that? You really have to just gain your own experience and having to deal with the parents. And it depends on your personality as well, like how you target these things, how to approach these things, how to deal with them.
In your experience in working with colleagues, what would you say are the character strengths that make for an incredibly supportive and knowledgeable speech and language therapist?
That's a tough question. Okay, I'm gonna say compassion and understanding, but at the same time firm. Okay, like you need to know that you cannot always cry with the parents. Okay, you have to be understanding. You have to realize what they're going through and be very compassionate and listen and be a very good listener. But at the same time, we cannot both be crying at this. Okay, someone needs to do something, and like a plan needs to be made, and like things need to be done. Okay, so I think it's about having a bit of both at the same time, but definitely having a good listening ear and being there for the parents. Sometimes like we don't even do the session if the parents are only here to talk and they just need someone to talk to. It's okay, like the session can be put on hold for a bit and just talk to that parent, understand what they're going through, because if they're not ready to be in therapy, or like they're too, let's say, emotional about it, or too in denial sometimes, okay, it can be a lot of things, and that will affect how therapy is going. Okay, so dealing with parents, dealing with siblings, dealing with the family in general is very important in order to get the best out of this therapy.
How do you detach? How do you go home and detach your day job from life?
I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy, especially when you go for a coffee with a friend who's a colleague or who's also in the field, and you're like, that's the only thing you're talking about. But you learn to do that. I exercise a lot. I'm someone who likes to go for a run, and I'm someone who likes to be, engaged in other things where you're completely detached from everything, not just work. Like sometimes you need to disconnect from everything, but mainly work, because it's very, very tiring and consuming if you want to take all of that with you home, you know. I am stuck reading books about therapy and watching series about therapy and all of that. So not really detaching, but still it's a different kind of attachment, let's say. So it's not easy, but with time you just learn how to do the difference, because if not, like the therapist will suffer, you know. It's very consuming, that it takes a lot of your energy, and you need to know how to make that difference.
And such a life learning, isn't it? It's definitely not something they teach you at university. It's one of those things that you learn to adapt, would you say, as you grow in your career and as a person?
Definitely, definitely. You cannot be taught everything in college, really. Like you learn the theory of things, you learn a bit how to deal with things, but you cannot be taught all of these things. It's really your personal experience and your personal personality, and like how you deal with things on your own, like even not related to therapy. And then you just have to implement all of that with your patients and with your daily life routines as well.
And I know in talking with some of your colleagues that you don't work in isolation. So talk to us about the team building and the team effort that a speech and language therapist needs to be prepared for.
Well, I have to say that I'm very lucky to be here in Europedia, part of a big team with therapists, doctors, nurses, even receptionists, everyone helping in one case. So whenever there's any doubt in something, or where you feel like this child needs to be referred to a different kind of therapy, like he's doing speech therapy, but you feel like maybe he has some sensory issues that he would also benefit from occupational therapy. And this is where we have regular MDTs, which is multidisciplinary team meetings, where we talk about each child, and you share what's going on with you to a different therapist, and you get a new perspective of things, a new point of view of things, which is very, very, very essential. And now that, since we're talking also about schools, it's so important to include schools and everything that's going on. The child, we're not living in isolation, the child is not living in isolation as well. He's a part of everything going on: the family, the school, the nursery, the team, the therapy, everything, even society. Like when I work with adults, for example, now here I'm in a pediatric clinic, but before I used to work with adults. These adults are living in society, who can be, for example, they have stuttering, okay, and they need to interact with society. It doesn't really matter if they're super fluent here in the clinic with me. When they go out in society, they have to know how to deal with this situation and how to communicate with people. So you bring in society a little bit in the clinic. You bring their friends, you bring their neighbors, you bring their parents, you know, and little by little you expose them more to the outside world. So no one is living in isolation except for COVID times, but even in that, everyone needs to be exposed to either the medical team or society and school, and the bigger family as well.
You sound completely immersed in this world. If you had to go back, Liz, would you choose this career path again?
I would definitely do that again. Maybe I would have done it maybe with more like confidence, because I told you, like at the beginning I was like, what am I doing here, but now definitely I'll go back and do the same thing exactly how it was.
Amazing. Watching this right now as a young person thinking, wow, that's a really interesting career path. I know your top three tips are: remember the patient's comfort, textbooks are essential, and you have to include family and siblings. What else do you want the aspiring speech and language therapist to be aware of?
They need to have fun in this session as well. That's my top priority. If I'm not having fun, the child is not having fun, then he's not learning anything. Okay, if I'm doing an activity where I feel like he's a bit bored or I'm a bit bored, I just change it. Okay, no, you don't do anything that will get you or the patient out of your comfort zone. You have fun in the session, you be creative, you introduce new things, you see his field of interest. What is he interested in? We're talking about, let's say we're working on vocabulary, okay, and the child is like a freak for football or soccer. You just bring those players with you in the room, and you just do a fun activity for you to have fun, for the child to have fun, and at the same time he's learning maybe to read, or maybe learning a new vocab or a new sound or whatever it is. So that's definitely something that every future therapist or future he doesn't have to be a therapist, like anyone working, they need to have fun in doing what they're doing.
I completely agree. I think
Yeah.
our careers should bring in an element of fun, both for us and for the people that we work with.
Yeah.
Liz, I have so many questions. I promise I'll limit it to one more. You mentioned that you worked with adults before working with children.
Yes.
How do you know what it is that you want to be specializing in? I know this is going to be a top question for a young person. How do you know? What are some of the clues for somebody thinking about this and thinking, well, I don't know if I want to work with children? What are some of those signals?
I say you have to try. You have to go see for yourself because, for example, my grandfather had a stroke when I was 16 or 15 years old. Okay, and then when I started this field, then I thought, okay, so a speech therapist would also work with adults, and apparently my grandfather also needed speech therapy, but we didn't know back then. So I'm like, definitely when I'm in third year, fourth year, I'm gonna go, more towards adult therapy or neurological therapy, and then again, this working in a hospital field that I just didn't like and I didn't feel connected to. And I felt more connected with kids and teenagers. And yes, adults, but when it comes to maybe stuttering or like communication difficulties, more than neurological difficulties. So I just had to try. I had to go in different trainings and see where I feel I belong more, where I feel I connect with the patient more, where I can give more, where I can learn more. Um, there's no general tip. You really have to go see for yourself. That's why trainings are very, very, very important. And I know that during the past years, it hasn't been very easy for students to go on and do live trainings and see face-to-face things that they need to be observing. But I think slowly life is going back to normal, regardless what normal is. But I am receiving a lot of trainees, for example, here in the center, and it's always the same thing that, wow, like this is totally different than what we thought it might be, or like it is so essential for them to come see what it is to be doing therapy with a child or with a teenager or with an adult or in a different field, for them to feel, okay, this is where I'm going to be for the rest of my life, or maybe like for the next 10 years of my life at least.
Fantastic. What an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. And that brings us to the end of another incredible conversation. Today we were speaking with Liz Hajj Nicolas, who is a speech and language therapist working at Neuropedia Children's Neuroscience Center here in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you at our next Desk Careers Digital Spotlight.